you tell us a bit more about yourself, your career as an intensive care doctor, and your connection to the veteran community?
Well, my name is Rachel Martin, and my connection to the Defence Force is that I'm married to Curtis McGrath, who is a veteran from the Army. He served in Afghanistan with their engineers, and while he was over there, he stepped on an improvised explosive device and lost both of his legs. He has spent a lot of time rehabbing and being with the military post his injury, and then he went on to a Paralympic sport career and competes for Australia. And he's also then transitioned. It was a period of years after his accident. He then transitioned into being an athlete and left the Army. And I was with him for 2 years before he got injured. People always want to know if I was with him when he got injured. And I work as, an intensive care doctor. So it's a really fun, great job. I encourage all women to get into medicine if they're interested. I've been graduated for 7 years. And I've got about another 3 years before I'm fully qualified as a consultant in intensive care medicine. So I work as a senior registrar at the Royal Brisbane Women's Hospital. You
work in a very male-dominated industry, and with respect, you're a young female. How do you find that and managing those biases, some of which may be conscious, but some of which are likely unconscious?
Yeah, I think we were talking earlier about this, a really good quote from Annabelle Crabb. It's one of my favourite ones, and it's come up a lot recently. And it's, we expect women to work like they don't have children and to raise children as if they don't work. And that's very much this unconscious bias that I think people are very happy for us to have children, very accepting, as long as it doesn't impact our work. And there's this invisible children, invisible motherhood. So you can be a mother, but it can't impact. And therefore, it also works on the flip side that you are expected to be a mum and to be there as well, but you're also expected to mother like you don't have a career and a work and obligations as well. So I think each side is accepting of the other as long as it doesn't interact, but life is not like that. Life is dynamic and fluid, and there is so much integration of the two that it's impossible to simultaneously, separately.
What do you think can be done about it? Do you think awareness of it is the first step, or is there, awareness can be a bit fluffy? What can we do about it?
Having female speakers at medical conferences, they, not very long ago, and actually still going on, that it's not uncommon to see panels in which there is not one female doctor in a field where there are lots of female doctors. But if they can't go away for a week and leave their family and have that ability to do that, and then that's not the only reason. It's very multifactorial, but simple steps like how can we make this work, and things like providing childcare is, a really simple step, I think.
And then extending that, I guess, to the veteran and defence sector and or environment. What do you think can be done better there to better break the bias and highlight the role that women play in support of the Defence Force and in support of veterans when they leave?
When you're in the Defence Force, if it's a relationship where there's one person who's serving and the other person is that support in that supportive role, they often, when you leave the forces, you can feel quite isolated. And it's like, well, now what for me too? I've also given up a lot during your career. So I think when we talk about transition, and there's a lot of support and work gone into transitioning the veteran into a post-defence military life, I think it's important to also support the spouse, because for them, it's also a complete change to them, and they're losing their identity as being the spouse of a serving Defence Force member. I think that if we can support them in that way, that might, improve outcomes later on. A lot of us don't have children. A lot of us have jobs, and a lot of us have a real identity outside of being a veteran spouse or a military wife. And that our whole world doesn't always revolve around living on an army base with small children and interacting with a very small group of people. And so I think there is a really strong connotation when you say army wife. People do have a really specific perception of us, and I think we need to kind of remarket ourselves as like, actually, we're this amazing, strong, independent women doing all sorts of things. And if they are being the primary caregiver and looking after children at home and moving around a lot, it still doesn't always look like it does on the TV show, and you still do have much more going on than just that very small nuclear presentation that gets shown in the media.
That's a really excellent point. And it also talks more broadly about what we can do ourselves in order to break those biases and start, really showing who we are and what we do. And, and as you quite rightly pointed out, we are, the risk of sounding like it, I'm now allocating a bit of a bias, but I think it takes a particular type of woman to, because we're talking about women, but of course it takes a particular type of person as a spouse, and to be a spouse and a civilian spouse of someone in the military, because it does ask a lot of you. But because we're kind of that conduit between the civilian and the military world, then our value, particularly in the transition space, is really underdone, isn't it?
The expectation is that you will be fully invested in their role in the military and that you have a big part to play. But when it comes to transitioning, the focus is all about the military person. And when you look at the NGO organisations involved, people who are now veterans and have transitioned out of the military, there's not much emphasis on the spouse. And the spouse is often the person who's there trying to work through the paperwork with them, working through DVA stuff with them. And when things go pear-shaped or when there's a mental health component, it's often the spouse who is the primary person there as their first port of call. And there's not much addressing them, addressing our role as that support person and who's there for us. And it's really exciting to see organisations now becoming more centred on a kind of like holistic overall picture of supporting veterans, and that includes their loved ones and it includes their families and it also includes their really close friends. The Army is quite set up for nuclear family because of just how transient you can be and how mobile you are. So if you're constantly moving, and that's based and centered on the partner's job, and if you've got the majority of people in defence identifying as a male, then that's going to set the precedent then on the expectation that the female is going to be able to travel with them. And not all jobs are very mobile. When I was growing up, my father was in the military, in the British military, and my mum was a nurse. And nursing is one of those jobs which you can move around quite easily, but you then end up leaving female spouses or spouses of any gender, then pigeonholed into having a position where they have to have a job which is able to be transient and able to move around. So nursing, teaching, those kind of like traditional jobs which can do that, but it really limits your scope and it limits their ability to grow their career the way that maybe they would want to. I think we need to address that.